In this video, we are going to look at the worst deaths caused by pranks, from a wife surprising her husband in the dark wearing a ghost costume, to a nervous first-time flyer whose bag triggered a security response before he could explain. It was October 31st, 2015. By late evening in Maplewood, New Jersey, a quiet Halloween night had settled in. Porch lights still glowed, pumpkins sat on the steps, candy bowls were left unattended. Everything looked normal. Inside one house, Renata Ose, 34, was preparing something carefully timed. She was a stay-at-home mother known for pranks, small scares, hidden items, sudden reactions that caught people off guard. In recent months, she had become more focused on horror films, paying attention to how stillness and silence made a moment land harder. 2 weeks earlier, she bought a costume, a white dress, a pale mask with hollow eyes, and a long dark wig. She planned one scare, and she planned it to be precise. She told no one. That night, after putting her 6-year-old daughter to bed, she turned off every light in the house. The hallway stretched straight from the front door, narrow and enclosed, with a small table set along one wall. She positioned her phone on a shelf, angled toward the entrance, and started recording. Then she stepped into place at the far end of the hall and went completely still. She did not shift her weight. She did not make a sound. She faced the door and waited for the exact moment it opened. At 10:42 p.m., her husband, Darnell Ose, 37, texted that he was leaving work. He had spent the day on a long electrical job, following the same routine he always did. Late return, quiet entry, lights on, straight to the kitchen. Nothing about the night suggested anything different. When he pulled into the driveway, one detail stood out immediately. The porch light was off. Renata always left it on. It was a small thing, but it broke the pattern he expected. He paused for a moment, looking at the dark entryway, then stepped out of the truck. That hesitation carried with him to the door. Instead of reaching inside for the wall switch, he took a small flashlight from his work bag and turned it on before stepping in. The beam cut forward as the door opened, sweeping across the dark hallway. It stopped on Renata. She was already facing him, motionless, silent. The mask reflected light with a dull sheen, while the eye holes remained completely dark. The white dress stood out sharply against the black hallway. She remained completely still, silent and unresponsive. For a brief moment, his brain tried to place what he was seeing: a figure inside the house, waiting, unresponsive, not stepping back, not identifying itself. The shape did not match anything familiar in that instant. His body reacted before the thought could finish. His hand moved to the side table just inside the door. He grabbed the lamp and swung it in one motion toward the figure in front of him. The ceramic base struck the left side of her head. Renata collapsed immediately. The silence broke. Darnell dropped the lamp, reached for the wall switch, and flooded the hallway with light. He rushed forward, pulling off the mask, realizing what he had done as he called 911. His voice shook as he tried to explain. The phone she had set up kept recording, capturing the flashlight beam, the movement, the impact, and the sudden shift from stillness to panic. Paramedics arrived minutes later. Renata was unresponsive, and she never regained consciousness. The strike fractured a thin section of skull near her ear and tore an artery beneath it. Blood began to build rapidly inside her head, increasing pressure within minutes. By the time she reached the hospital, the damage had already advanced too far. Emergency surgery was attempted to relieve the pressure, but the bleeding could not be stopped. She was pronounced dead early the next morning. Investigators reviewed the scene, the 911 call, and the phone footage. There were no signs of intent beyond the planned scare. The reaction was immediate, triggered by what he saw in the dark before he could process it. No charges were filed. Their daughter was later placed with family. Darnell left the house within days. It was July 4th, 2016. Lake Anna, Virginia was crowded by midday. Boats filled the water, docks were packed, and people moved between music, drinks, and swimming. The weather was clear and hot. It felt like a normal holiday afternoon, with no sense that anything serious could happen. Cody Farrell, 28, worked as a warehouse shift supervisor in Fredericksburg, Virginia. He was easygoing, quick to laugh, and often the target of jokes in his friend group. He was 3 weeks away from his wedding, and that weekend at the lake was his bachelor trip with the groomsmen. His fiancée, Brianna, was in Richmond for her own celebration. The group planned to record a prank to play at the wedding for laughs, wanting to capture his reaction on camera. What most of them knew, but did not take seriously, was that Cody could not swim well. He avoided deep water and stayed near the edges. The group rented a 2-level pontoon boat. By early afternoon, Cody had consumed around 8 to 10 drinks over 4 hours. At about 2:30 p.m., he fell asleep on a padded bench on the upper deck, about 8 to 10 feet above the water. One of the groomsmen, Marcus, had brought a large inflatable paddleboard. While Cody was asleep, the group planned a prank. They decided to place him on the board, tie his wrists together in front with zip ties, loosely bind his ankles, and push him into the water. They talked about it for several minutes. One suggested making sure he landed flat, while another briefly brought up using a life jacket, but the idea was dismissed. No one tested the board with a weight. One person prepared to record on a phone as, at around 3:15 p.m., they carried Cody, still mostly unconscious, and placed him on his back on the paddleboard. His arms were tied across his chest before they pushed the board over the railing. However, it did not land flat. The board hit the water at an angle, with Cody's right shoulder striking first. The shift in weight caused the board to roll immediately. Cody fell face down into the water. The board flipped over him, partially covering his upper body as he went face down. His wrists were bound, limiting his ability to push himself up or turn over. His ankles allowed slight movement, but not enough to stabilize himself or regain balance in the water. From the boat, his legs were visible moving under the water. The group initially laughed, assuming he was fine. About 40 seconds passed before the movement slowed. At around 1 minute, one of the groomsmen, Tyler, jumped into the water and tried to flip the board. It shifted and rolled as they tried to grab it, slowing them down. Another person jumped in to help. Together, they managed to turn the board over at about 2 minutes and 20 seconds after he entered the water. Cody was pulled back onto the boat. He was unresponsive and not breathing. One person began CPR. The boat was driven quickly toward the nearest dock. A nearby boater who had seen the incident had already called emergency services. Paramedics arrived at 3:31 p.m. Cody was taken to a nearby hospital, where he was pronounced dead later that afternoon. The medical examiner found a large amount of water in his lungs, confirming he was breathing while submerged. His blood alcohol level was 0.19%. At that level, reaction time and coordination are heavily reduced. The zip ties showed marks from pulling against them. His fingernails showed minor damage, consistent with trying to grip a surface. There were signs of oxygen deprivation in his eyes. The report noted that even without restraints, his intoxication and inability to swim would have made escape unlikely. 3 of the 4 groomsmen were charged with involuntary manslaughter. Marcus, who planned the prank and brought the restraints, faced the most serious charge. A phone video of the incident became key evidence. In court, prosecutors focused on how the situation escalated from a joke into a preventable death. Marcus was sentenced to 8 years in prison for his direct role in organizing and escalating the prank, while the other groomsmen received 2 to 4 years, with some portions suspended depending on their level of involvement. It was February 8, 2014. A house in Bowling Green, Ohio was loud with music and crowded rooms. Around 40 students moved between spaces as noise carried through the walls. Neighbors had already complained. Inside, the party was busy, unstructured, and no one was paying close attention. One of the guests, Theo Baumgartner, 20, was a second-year university student. He grew up near Toledo and had struggled to fit in during his first year. He didn't go out often and usually kept to himself. In the weeks before, a neighbor had started inviting him to small gatherings, and he began showing up more. He told his mother things were improving, that he was starting to feel included. By around 12:40 a.m., Theo had fallen asleep on a living room couch. He was lying on his back, head tilted slightly to one side, breathing slow and steady. He had not been drinking heavily. He was simply tired, worn down from the noise and the late hour. The few people he knew at the party had moved to another room. A group of 5 students who didn't know him well noticed him asleep. At first, it was casual. Someone picked up a marker and drew a small line on his cheek. There was laughter, a few photos, nothing unusual for a party setting. Then someone suggested adding something else for a bigger reaction. A piece of candy was placed near his lips. He didn't respond. The group kept going. Chips, small items, each one meant to get a reaction when he woke up. When nothing happened, someone grabbed a ping pong ball from a nearby table. There was brief hesitation, then it was brought closer. One person pressed it lightly against his lips. Theo shifted slightly but did not wake. The ball was pushed just past his lips and held there for a moment. At first, nothing changed. Then his jaw moved slightly. His body made a small reflex motion, followed by a sudden inhale. The ball shifted inward, sliding past his tongue and into the back of his throat. The change was immediate. A faint clicking sound came from his mouth as his airway became blocked. His chest moved, but almost no air passed through. His breathing turned tight and high-pitched. At first, a few people laughed, thinking he was reacting to the prank. Then his face began to darken, and his movements became weak and uncoordinated. The mood shifted quickly. Someone said to pull it out. One person reached into his mouth but couldn't grip the ball. It was smooth and lodged too far back. Another tried, pushing deeper by mistake before pulling away. Someone attempted the Heimlich maneuver, but Theo's position on the couch made it ineffective. Panic spread through the room. Emergency services were called immediately. Instructions were given to turn him onto his side and continue trying to clear his airway. The obstruction did not move. His body became still. When emergency responders arrived, they used specialized tools to locate and remove the ball. It was successfully taken out, but too much time had passed. Theo had gone without enough oxygen for several minutes. At the hospital, scans showed severe brain damage caused by oxygen deprivation. His body remained alive, but there was no recovery of brain function. He was declared brain dead 2 days later and removed from life support shortly after, with his parents present. 3 students involved in the incident were later charged with involuntary manslaughter. Each of them was sentenced to between 9 months and 3 years in prison, with penalties varying based on their level of involvement. It was March 14th, 2017. A busy domestic airport in Atlanta moved at its usual pace, with long lines, rolling luggage, and constant announcements echoing through the terminal. Security checkpoints processed hundreds of passengers each hour. Nothing that morning seemed unusual. It was a normal Tuesday. Emilio Restrepo, 23, had been saving for 8 months for this trip. He was a first-generation Colombian-American from a small city in Georgia, working as a line cook. Co-workers described him as hard-working but often anxious. He had a history of panic disorder and was not consistently taking his medication. This was his first time flying internationally alone, planning to visit his grandmother in Medellin. In the 2 weeks before his flight, he had worked 14 straight days to afford the ticket. The person who drove him to the airport said he already looked tense before getting out of the car. 2 co-workers, Jared and Pete, came with him to the airport, pretending to see him off. While Emilio was distracted at a check-in kiosk, they slipped a small plastic bag into the front pocket of his backpack. Inside was a sealed packet of white granular substance. Jared recorded the setup on his phone. They planned to reveal it as a prank after security and post the reaction online. They chose Emilio because they expected a stronger reaction due to his anxiety. At 7:42 a.m., Emilio placed his backpack on the conveyor belt. He had already asked a TSA officer twice about removing his laptop. During the scan, the X-ray operator flagged the bag after seeing an unknown sealed packet. Emilio was directed to secondary screening. When the officer opened the pocket and pulled out the bag, Emilio reacted immediately. He said it was not his, repeating it as his voice rose. He looked toward the entrance and saw Jared and Pete standing there, one holding up a phone. His breathing became fast and shallow. He stepped toward the table and was told to step back. He did not follow the instructions. Instead, he turned quickly and reached down toward his right hip, where his phone was clipped in a belt holster. He had done that motion many times before. He was trying to get his phone to show messages and prove he was traveling normally. A nearby airport police officer saw the movement as a possible threat. The sudden turn and reach toward the waist matched a risk pattern. The officer reacted within seconds and fired a Taser X-26. Both probes hit, one in the upper back and one in the lower back. The electric current caused full muscle lock. Emilio lost all control of his body. He fell straight backward. His body stiffened and his arms stayed at his sides. He could not react or catch himself. The back of his head struck the hard tile floor with full force. Witnesses nearby saw the fall, and cameras recorded it from several angles. He showed no movement after the impact. Officers and airport medics responded within seconds. He was taken to a nearby hospital. A CT scan showed a large brain bleed and a fracture at the base of his skull. Doctors performed emergency surgery, but the bleeding could not be stopped. Emilio died later that morning, about 4 hours after the fall. The taser did not directly cause his death. There was no heart failure and no lasting damage from the shock itself. The cause of death was the impact. The electric current prevented any reflex to break the fall, leading to the head injury. Tests showed no drugs or alcohol in his system. Jared and Pete were arrested at the airport within an hour. The evidence showed the moment the bag was placed in the backpack. Both were charged with involuntary manslaughter and reckless conduct. The officer who used the taser was placed on leave and later cleared after review. Jared was later sentenced to 10 years in prison, while Pete received 8 years for his role in the incident. It was September 19th, 2015. A bar in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, had a private section set aside for a small birthday gathering. About a dozen people filled the space. Drinks were set across the table, music played in the background, and a boxed cake sat off to the side waiting to be brought out. Nadia Kowalczyk, 21, was a third-year nursing student. She was known among classmates as quiet, focused, and dependable. She rarely went out to bars, preferring to spend most evenings studying or resting between clinical rotations. That night, she made an exception. Her roommate, Cassie, had planned a small birthday celebration and encouraged her to come. Nadia agreed, expecting something simple. She had mild asthma, managed with an inhaler she always carried in her bag. She had just completed a pediatric rotation and was used to staying calm in difficult situations. Cassie wanted the night to stand out. Earlier that day, she had seen videos online where cakes were lit using high-proof alcohol to create a dramatic flame effect. She decided to recreate it. Before arriving, she bought a bottle of 151 proof rum, a liquid with a high alcohol content that ignites easily and burns with a steady flame. She poured some over the cake ahead of time, letting it soak into the surface. Just before bringing it out, she added more, ensuring the top layer was fully coated. Along with the visual effect, she planned a prank, pushing the cake into Nadia's face as everyone laughed. She assumed the flame would go out on contact. She did not test it. She did not warn Nadia. Later in the evening, the group gathered around as the cake was brought forward. Cassie lit the surface. The alcohol caught quickly, spreading across the top in a thin, even layer of flame that rose several inches into the air. The room filled with cheers. The fire reflected off nearby surfaces, casting flickering light across the walls. Nadia stood in place, smiling, raising her hands slightly as if preparing for a normal birthday moment. She had no reason to expect anything different. As the cake reached her, Cassie pushed it forward. The flame did not go out. The burning alcohol remained active and transferred directly onto Nadia's face and hair. The fire spread across her skin in a thin, moving layer. She recoiled immediately, screaming as she pulled back. The heat was sudden and intense. Someone nearby threw water in an attempt to help. The flames weakened, but the liquid spread, carrying burning alcohol across her chin and down toward her neck before finally extinguishing. The visible burns formed quickly, but the more serious damage had already begun. At the moment of impact, Nadia gasped sharply in shock. That reflexive inhale drew in hot air, alcohol vapor, and combustion gases directly into her airway. Within seconds, the internal lining of her throat was exposed to extreme heat. At first, she remained standing. She tried to speak, but her voice came out strained. Her throat tightened as she reached for her inhaler and used it, expecting relief. But nothing changed. The tissue inside her airway had already begun to swell. Her breathing became louder and more difficult. Each inhale produced a tight, restricted sound. The swelling progressed rapidly, narrowing the space for air to pass. Her lips began to lose color as oxygen levels dropped. Despite this, she remained conscious, trying to stay steady as the people around her shifted from confusion to panic. Emergency services were called. By the time paramedics arrived, her airway had already narrowed significantly. Attempts to insert a breathing tube were complicated by the swelling and damage. She was transported to the hospital while still struggling to breathe. Doctors worked to secure her airway, but the swelling had progressed too far. The internal burns had caused severe inflammation from the back of her throat into the upper airway. The passage for air had nearly closed. Shortly after midnight, she died from airway obstruction caused by inhalation injury. The examination later found minor external burns on her lips and chin, but the critical damage was internal. The heat had caused deep tissue injury, leading to rapid swelling and blockage. Her asthma was noted but did not contribute to the outcome. The high-proof alcohol had burned long enough at close range to cause fatal inhalation damage. Cassie was later charged with involuntary manslaughter and was sentenced to 2 to 5 years in prison. The bar also faced legal action after it was determined that staff had seen alcohol being poured onto the cake but did not intervene. It was July 22, 2014. The narrow dirt paths between rice fields outside Hoi An were still wet after days of rain. First light came just before 5:30 a.m. The area was quiet. A phone had been placed in the brush beside one path before sunrise, already recording. Min Tran, 55, was a rice farmer who had worked the same fields for decades. He raised 2 children mostly on his own after his wife died in 2009. He was known as quiet and hard-working, often in the fields before sunrise. He had a slight hearing loss in his left ear from an earlier accident. Each morning he checked water levels along the paddies, carrying tools over his shoulder. His daughter Lena, 24, was visiting from Da Nang, where she worked as a seamstress and had come home to help with the harvest. That morning, she walked a few steps behind him. Earlier that morning, 2 teenage boys from the village, aged 16 and 17, had coated a section of the raised dirt path with dish soap and cooking oil, then covered it with loose straw. The spot sat on a slight curve, making the surface difficult to notice until someone was already stepping onto it. Beside the path, the paddy had been flooded for days, holding several inches of water over thick, heavy mud. They planned to record someone slipping and share the video later, expecting a harmless reaction. Min and Lena left their house just after dawn and followed the narrow raised path between the flooded fields. The surface looked the same as the rest, packed dirt with scattered straw. But as Min stepped onto the covered section, his left foot lost grip instantly. There was no warning. The thin layer of straw shifted under him, sliding over the slick mixture beneath. His weight carried forward before he could react. His right foot tried to plant, but it found no stable ground. His body twisted sharply to the left as his footing gave way. The tools over his shoulder swung outward, pulling him further off balance. In one motion, he slipped off the edge of the path. The drop was short but uncontrolled. His left shoulder struck first, followed by the side of his head hitting the submerged ground at the edge of the paddy. The water hid the surface, but beneath it was compacted clay, hard and unyielding. The impact was heavy and direct, and he came to rest at an angle. His upper body lay in the shallow water, face turned downward, cheeks submerged. One leg remained caught on the edge of the path, twisted beneath him. There was no movement. Lena reached the same spot seconds later. She stepped forward without seeing the hazard. Her foot slid immediately. She fell forward, her knees hitting the path, followed by the right side of her head striking the hard edge. The impact left her disoriented. When she lifted her head, she saw her father lying motionless in the water. She called out to him, but there was no response. She tried to move toward him, pressing her hands into the mud, but it gave way under her weight. Her palms sank, her knees slipped, and she could not gain traction. She began shouting for help. Nearby farmers heard her and ran toward the path. When they arrived, they stepped around the slick section and entered the water. 2 of them lifted Min and pulled him onto the path. His body was limp, his head falling back, his arms unresponsive. They checked for breathing and pulse. There were no signs of either. CPR was started immediately, but there was no response. Medical reports stated that the fall fractured the left side of his skull and caused severe head trauma, rendering him unconscious on impact. The force of the fall had likely caused immediate loss of vital function. When he was pulled from the water, he had no pulse and was not breathing. He was pronounced dead at the scene later that morning. The 2 boys were identified soon after. Because of their ages, the case was handled under juvenile law and drew attention within the community. Lena sustained a minor skull fracture and a concussion and was treated in a hospital for several days. She later returned to Da Nang and stayed away from the village for over a year. The land was sold the following year, and neighbors helped harvest the remaining rice as a gesture to the family.